Hi guys, I'm Brielle, and today I'm going to answer some frequently asked questions about service dogs. These are the frequently asked questions about service animals in the ADA from the ADA website. It is ada.gov/regs2010/service_animal_QA.html. So this is the website that basically talks about different things that people frequently ask about service dogs in regards to like the law and legality and where they stand with those kind of things. So I'm gonna kind of read this to you guys and give you a little bit of like a translation of what it means, just kind of in more understandable terms. So starting at the beginning. Many people with disabilities use a service animal in order to fully participate in everyday life. Dogs can be trained to perform many important tasks to assist people with disabilities, such as providing stability for a person who has difficulty walking, picking up items for a person who uses a wheelchair, preventing a child with autism from wandering away, or alerting a person who has hearing loss when someone is approaching from behind. The Department of Justice continues to receive many questions about how the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, applies to service animals. The ADA requires state and local governments, agencies, businesses, and non-profit organizations, covered entities, that provide goods and services to the public to make reasonable modifications in their policies, practices, or procedures when necessary to accommodate people with disabilities. The service animal rules fall under this general principle. Accordingly, entities that have a no pets policy generally must modify the policy to allow service animals into their facilities. This publication provides guidance on the ADA's service animal provisions and should be read in conjunction with the publication ADA Revised Requirements Service Animals. Question number 1. What is a service animal? Under the ADA, a service animal is defined as a dog that has been individually trained to do work or perform tasks for an individual with a disability. The tasks performed by the dog must be directly related to the person's disability. So for example, they mentioned a couple different tasks, things like helping someone steady themselves when they have issues walking, retrieving medication for someone with a mental illness, reminding them to take it, that kind of stuff. And they have to be related to the person's disability. So I think I said this in the last video, something like if you have diabetes and your blood pressure isn't affected at all, but your dog is trained to do blood pressure alert, that wouldn't be a service dog for you because that dog doesn't do a task that it's related to your disability. Question 2. What does do work or perform tasks mean? The dog must be trained to take a specific action when needed to assist the person with a disability. For example, a person with diabetes may have a dog that is trained to alert him when his blood sugar reaches high or low levels. A person with depression may have a dog that is trained to remind her to take her medication. Or a person who has epilepsy may have a dog that is trained to detect the onset of a seizure and help the person remain safe during the seizure. So, a pretty obvious description of task, at least for the program that I work for, we define task as a consciously performed effort made by the dog to actively help their handler. So a dog snuggling with you, just kind of like on their own accord, isn't really a dog that's actively doing something to help you. They don't understand that you are in distress, or maybe they do, but they don't think that necessarily that them snuggling with you is going to help. But a dog that is trained to let you know, hey, take your medication, you're in distress, that's different. They are actively trying to help you with your episode. Question 3. Are emotional support, therapy, comfort, or companion animals considered service animals under the ADA? No. These terms are used to describe animals that provide comfort just by being with a person. Because they have not been trained to perform a specific job or task, they do not qualify as service animals under the ADA. However, some state or local governments have laws that allow people to take emotional support animals into public places. You may check with your state and local government agencies to find out about these laws. So, that's basically saying please check with your local government because your state or local government might have different laws. But generally, the only animals that are allowed in public places that are not pet friendly are service animals. Those are the only ones that are allowed in general circumstances. Obviously, there's circumstances like the airport where, a bunch of different types of working animals are allowed. There's different rules for like, going into a nursing home with a therapy dog, that kind of stuff if you're with a program. But generally, service dogs are the only animals that are allowed. Question 4. If someone's dog calms them when having an anxiety attack, does this qualify as a service animal? It depends. The ADA makes a distinction between psychiatric service animals and emotional support animals. If the dog has been trained to sense that an anxiety attack is about to happen and take a specific action to help avoid the attack or lessen its impact, that would qualify as a service animal. However, if the dog's mere presence provides comfort, that would not be considered a service animal under the ADA. So, mere presence meaning not actively doing anything to help the person. So, remembering what a task means, and if your dog is trained a task, then that means that they're a service animal, not an emotional support animal. Question 5. Does the ADA require service animals to be professionally trained? No. People with disabilities have the right to train the dog themselves and are not required to use a professional service dog training program. So, you do not have to have your dog trained by anyone but yourself. You can owner train your service dog. In most circumstances, I have found that program dogs or privately trained dogs do have more success than owner trained dogs. There's a little bit higher wash rate with owner trained dogs, and wash means to basically forcibly retire your dog from working and not allow them to work anymore because they're unfit for work. So I work for a service dog training program, and I also privately train. So what that means is I work for a program which is kind of like a school. So there's a lot of different trainers who work there that will be working with your dog if you do decide to go with a program. But private training means that you're doing some of the training yourself, and then you have a trainer that's also doing some of the training. So, and that's just one person that you're working with, not like a whole, collection of people. So personally, I feel like the best option to go with, if it were me, would be private training. And the reason that I believe higher in private training is because you still get to have that bond with your dog that you would if you were owner training, but you get that expert opinion with you that's able to kind of like, in most situations what I do is I train the handler. So being a private trainer is mostly about training the handler to train their dog something. So like, in most situations I will tell the handler what to do and allow them to do most of the training so that their dog learns from their handler and creates that higher level bond with them. Versus with like a program dog where you might not even meet your dog until they've been already fully trained. And then at that point it's difficult to form a bond with them sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. My program works a little differently. Most people bring in dogs that they've had for like a year and they would like to train their dog to be a service dog, and then they come to classes every day but they go home every night. So different things like that, you just got to find the program or private training or possibly owner training that works for you and your dog. Question 6. Are service animals in training considered service animals under the ADA? No. Under the ADA, the dog must already be trained before it can be taken into public places. However, some state or local laws cover animals that are still in training. So definitely, this is really important. Check your state and local laws. If you bring a service dog in training in somewhere and they mess up and your state or local laws do not cover service dogs in training, you could be in some pretty big legal trouble because that would be, illegal. You wouldn't be allowed to bring your animal in if they're not fully trained by ADA standards. However, ADA standards, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, are relatively loose. So people who think that their service dog is still a service dog in training under the ADA, you might be wrong. Your dog might already know the number of tasks it needs to know in order to be considered a service dog. However, in the service dog community, we've sort of kind of ramped it up to the point where we're training to a definite higher standard than the ADA requires. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing at all. I think that that's a really good thing. We should definitely be always striving for higher standards with our dogs. However, you don't have to continue to mark your service animal as a service animal in training if it's preventing you from going and training in public places if your dog meets the requirements of the ADA. Question 7. What questions can a covered entity's employees ask to determine if a dog is a service animal? in situations where it is not obvious that the dog is a service animal, meaning if it is considered obvious if A, the person is blind and it's very obviously a guide dog, or, B, the person is, in a wheelchair and it's very obvious that that dog, works for the person that's in the wheelchair, helps them pick things up, that kind of stuff. There are a bunch of different situations where it's obvious that the dog is a service animal, and they're legally allowed to ask you this. I just think that it's interesting that we state, like, when it's not obvious, but, like, if you're gonna get asked, it doesn't matter if it's obvious or not, because people will still ask you even if it's pretty obvious that the dog does. Staff may only ask 2 specific questions. 1, is the dog a service animal required because of a disability? And 2, what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? Staff are not allowed to request any documentation for the dog, require that the dog demonstrate its task, or inquire about the nature of the person's disability. So this talks about IDs and identification. We'll talk about this a little bit more later, but service dog registries are definitely not sanctioned by the ADA. They are not required for your dog to work in the United States. Question 8. Do service animals have to wear a vest or patch or special harness identifying them as service animals? No, the ADA does not require service animals to wear a vest, ID tag, or specific harness. So your dog can work naked. Your dog technically doesn't have to be wearing anything to work, except in most states they require that your dog have the rabies tag on at all times. So I guess technically you'd have to wear a collar and the rabies tag. But technically your dog doesn't have to wear anything to work. Most people find it easier to mark their dog just to make sure that other people know that it's a service animal and they can't just go up and pet the dog, and also makes it easier. Usually you get asked the questions less. It just kind of makes things easier and faster. And then there's people like me who I have a mobility related disability, so I have to have my dog wearing a harness because that's the main reason that he's working with me, is so that I can have that balance, that handle. Question 9. Who is responsible for the care and supervision of a service animal? The handler is responsible for caring for and supervising the service animal, which includes toileting, feeding, grooming, and veterinary care. Covered entities are not obligated to supervise or otherwise care for a service animal. If you go up to the front desk of a hotel and ask them for a bowl of water for your service dog, they do not legally have to provide it for you. And the reasoning for that is that that would be considered care of the service animal. They don't have to provide you with anything for your dog. You should, that's why I always tell people, plan to bring things yourself and be nice and do it anyway. A lot of places will likely just do that, either because they don't know their rights or because they're just trying to be nice. Question 10. Can a person bring a service animal with them as they go through a salad bar or other self-service food lines? Yes, service animals must be allowed to accompany their handlers to and through self-service food lines. Similarly, service animals may not be prohibited from communal food preparation areas, such as are commonly found in shelters or dormitories. That one's pretty straightforward. Question 11. Can hotels assign designated rooms for guests with service animals out of consideration for other guests? No. A guest with a disability who uses a service animal must be provided the same opportunity to reserve any available room at the hotel as other guests without disabilities. They may not be restricted to pet-friendly rooms. Just in general, like a general point to make is that if you are struggling with like a hotel saying like, we don't have any pet-friendly rooms available, they don't have to give you a pet-friendly room. You're allowed to stay in any room that's there, and they can't charge you a cleaning fee or a pet fee or anything like that.
Even if your dog sheds?
Yes, even if your dog sheds. Question 12. Can hotels charge a cleaning fee for guests who have service animals? No, hotels are not permitted to charge guests for cleaning the hair or dander shed by a service animal. However, if a guest service animal causes damages to a guest room, a hotel is permitted to charge the same fee for damages as charged to other guests. So let's say your dog pees on the carpet, then you would have to pay for that. But if your dog just sheds or has dandruff or whatever, they can't charge you for that. Question 13. Can people bring more than one service animal into a public place? Generally, yes. Some people with disabilities may use more than one service animal to perform different tasks. For example, a person who has a visual disability and a seizure disorder may use one service animal to assist with wayfinding and another that is trained as a seizure alert dog. Other people may need 2 service animals for the same task, such as a person who needs 2 dogs to assist him or her with stability when walking. Staff may ask the 2 permissible questions, see question 7, about each of the dogs. If both dogs can be accommodated, both should be allowed in. In some circumstances, however, it may not be possible to accommodate more than 1 service animal. For example, in a crowded small restaurant, only 1 dog may be able to fit under the table. The only other place for the second dog would be in the aisle, which would block the space between the tables. In this case, staff may request that one of the dogs be left outside. So again, something similar, the fundamentally altering thing that I talked about. If having the second service dog fundamentally alters the nature of the business, such as, a dog blocking the aisles between tables where you can't get in and around, then that would fundamentally alter the business's ability to perform their main function, and your dog would not be permitted inside. Question 14. Does a hospital have to allow an inpatient with a disability to keep a service animal in his or her room? Generally, yes. Service animals must be allowed in patient rooms, and anywhere else in the hospital the public and patients are allowed to go. They cannot be excluded on the grounds that staff can provide the same services. So when I was inpatient and Arlo was with me, he was allowed to be with me even though staff would consistently say, well, we can do the same thing. We can give you a weighted blanket for deep pressure therapy, and we can, when you're passed out, we can put a blanket under your legs to keep your legs elevated. That kind of stuff, that doesn't fly. Your service dog is still allowed to be with you, even if the hospital staff complains that they can do the needed tasks that you need. Question 15. What happens if a patient who uses a service animal is admitted to the hospital and is unable to care for or supervise their animal? If the patient is not able to care for the service animal, the patient can make arrangements for a family member or friend to come to the hospital to provide these services, as it is always preferable that the service animal and its handler not be separated, or to keep the dog during the hospitalization. If the patient is unable to care for the dog and is unable to arrange for someone else to take care for the dog, the hospital may place the dog in a boarding facility until the patient is released or make other appropriate arrangements. However, the hospital must give the patient the opportunity to make arrangements for the dog's care before taking such steps. So let's say I went inpatient and I was mentally incapacitated, whatever. I wasn't able to take care of Arlo. I can call my mom and have her come pick up Arlo. Or let's say she's not available. The hospital has to give me the chance to call her before they send Arlo to a boarding facility. And they can't send him straight to the pound or anything. They can't send him to a shelter. Question 16. Must a service animal be allowed to ride in an ambulance with its handler? Generally, yes. However, if the space in the ambulance is crowded and the dog's presence would interfere with the emergency medical staff's ability to treat the patient, staff should make other arrangements to have the dog transported to the hospital. So that could mean another ambulance has to come and pick up the dog. Isn't that wild? I think it's wild. Or, something like, oh, well, this person, they have to come and get the dog in their car, something like that. The hospital is required to make those arrangements. Question 17. Does the ADA require that service animals be certified as service animals? No. Covered entities may not require documentation such as proof that the animal has been certified, trained, or licensed as a service animal as a condition for entry. There are individuals and organizations that sell service animal certification or registration documents online. These documents do not convey any rights under the ADA, and the Department of Justice does not recognize them as proof that the dog is a service animal. You can register anything you want as a service animal on those websites, and as long as you're giving them money, they will register it. They will put it under their whatever and give you the piece of paper. You can register this textbook. You can register this laptop. You can register this sweatshirt. You can register this laptop. You can register this cell phone. You can register the bread. You can register anything you want. And they can say, oh, well, it's a service animal. You know what? I'm not allowed to have my phone in the movie theater? Excuse me, it's a service phone. So you can register anything you want on those websites. It's ridiculous. Service dog registries are fake.
What about if it's through a state?
However, I will say, I was gonna say that. However, I will say that there are some registries done by programs. Like my program has a card system, and it's actually to get into the building, but it does say, service dog handler on it, and it has the dog's name and stuff like that. So I guess technically that's an ID. That kind of stuff is legally, it's not like you're not allowed to have it, it just means that it doesn't hold any legal precedent. So if I were to go to court with somebody and say,
Get my ID.
my dog was denied access to this building. And they're like, why? What happened? And I was like, I don't know. He was barking, but like, whatever, it's fine. They didn't let him in, and I have an ID, so legally they need to get in a bunch of fucking trouble. No, that ID does not hold up in court. It's not gonna do anything for you. Sorry, Karen. That ID isn't gonna do anything in a court of law. Basically, the only thing it is a piece of paper. It does make it easier to get into places because you can show them your ID and just be like, oh, certified service dog. However, I would say that ID usage is really toxic to other handlers, and the reasoning for that is that there are some people out there, who follow the law and don't buy IDs. So let's say you go into a Walmart, you show them your ID, and you walk on by. The next person who comes in, the employees are going to expect to see an ID from that person, even if they might not have one, because it technically isn't required by law. And they're probably going to kick that person out because they think, oh, well, they don't have an ID, and the last person did, so they must have to have it. So, that's a place where you can get in trouble. Question 18. My city requires all dogs be vaccinated. Does this apply to my service animal? Yes. Individuals who have service animals are not exempt from local animal control or public health requirements. Let's say your city has laws for rabies, bordetella, parvo vaccine, like a bunch of different vaccines. You have to get all those vaccines for your animal. That is required because service animals aren't exempt from animal control laws. Question 19. My city requires all dogs to be registered and licensed. Does this apply to my service animal? Yes, service animals are subject to local dog licensing and registration requirements. That doesn't mean registering as a service dog, that means registering as a dog in the area. So dog registration. Question 20. My city requires me to register my dog as a service animal. Is this legal under the ADA? No. Mandatory registration of service animals is not permissible under the ADA. However, as stated above, service animals are subject to the same licensing and vaccination rules that apply to all dogs. Question 21. My city or college offers a voluntary registration program for people with disabilities who use service animals and provides a special tag identifying the dogs as service animals. Is this legal under the ADA? Yes. Colleges and other entities such as local governments may offer voluntary registries. Many communities maintain a voluntary registry that serves as a public purpose, for example, to ensure that emergency staff know to look for service animals during an emergency evacuation process. Some offer a benefit, such as a reduced dog license fee for individuals who register their service animals. Registries for purposes like this are permitted under the ADA. An entity may not, however, require that a dog be registered as a service animal as a condition of being permitted in public places. This would be a violation of the ADA. Question 22. Can service animals be any breed of dog? Yes, the ADA does not restrict the type of dog breeds that can be service animals. Question 23. Can individuals with disabilities be refused access to a facility based solely on the breed of their service animal? This was a really interesting thing that I continuously get asked all the time. When I was there was a while when my program had me handling this dog that was a American Pit Bull Terrier. And I would constantly get asked, like, does that make it more difficult for you to get in places? Do people, are you allowed in places that all service animals are allowed? Yes, you're allowed to be in all places that service animals are allowed. They're not supposed to discriminate based on breed, but obviously people do because people are afraid of pit bulls. It's really sad, but that's just the case. I would get discriminated against because they would say like, oh, well, pit bulls can't be service dogs, and it's like, yes, they can. So you can't be denied access to a facility based solely on the breed of the service animal. A service animal may not be excluded based on assumptions or stereotypes about the animal's breed or how the animal might behave. However, if a particular service animal behaves in a way that poses a direct threat to the health or safety of others, has a history of such behavior, or is not under the control of the handler, the animal may be excluded. If an animal is excluded for such reasons, staff must still offer their goods or services to the person without the animal present. If your dog is barking and, has an issue in a building, the staff can kick your dog out, but they have to allow you to come back and receive the goods and services that you would have received. But they have to allow you to come back without the dog. Question 24. If a municipality has an ordinance that bans certain dog breeds, does the ban apply to service animals? So there are places where American Pit Bull Terriers and other pitty breeds are banned. No. Municipalities that prohibit specific breeds of dogs must make an exception for a service animal of a prohibited breed unless the dog poses a direct threat to the health or safety of others. Under the direct threat provisions of the ADA, local jurisdictions need to determine on a case-by-case basis whether a particular service animal can be excluded based on that particular animal's actual behavior or history, but they may not exclude a service animal because of fears or generalizations about how an animal or breed might behave. It is important to note that breed restrictions differ significantly from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. In fact, some jurisdictions have no breed restrictions. So let's say in your area, bully breeds are not allowed. You can't have a bully breed as a pet. You can have a bully breed as a service animal. You might experience discrimination, but technically that's supposed to be illegal. So you can have that dog as your service animal. You just can't have it as a pet. Question 25. When can service animals be excluded? The ADA does not require covered entities to modify policies, practices, or procedures if it would fundamentally alter the nature of the goods, services, programs, or activities provided to the public. Nor does it overrule legitimate safety requirements. If admitting service animals would fundamentally alter the nature of a service or program, service animals may be prohibited. In addition, if a particular service animal is out of control and the handler does not take effective action to control it, or it is not housebroken, that animal may be excluded. What that means is, let's say I wanted to go into a zoo, and if I were to go into the zoo with my service dog and there was an animal there that was a, natural predator of dogs, an animal that would naturally, want to eat my dog, and they were doing like a show and that animal was like allowed out and stuff like that, and that would be fundamentally altering it because my dog would actively be in danger and I would actively be endangering the other animal for, because they could, possibly attack my dog, that kind of stuff. That's not a good example. There are a bunch of different situations where your service dog may fundamentally alter program or service or whatever it is the place is trying to provide. I'll try and think of a couple reasons and maybe leave them down in the comments. It's really difficult for me to kind of think about that because I haven't come across a lot of situations like that. But one of the biggest things, I guess, is like a burn unit in a hospital. That's the example that I always use. That burn unit has to be sterile, and your dog being there makes it not sterile. That would be fundamentally altering the product or service. And then they're going to give us some examples here. So question 26, when might a service dog's presence fundamentally alter the nature of a service or program provided to the public? In most settings, the presence of a service animal will not result in a fundamental alteration. However, there are some exceptions. For example, at a boarding school, service animals could be restricted from a specific area of a dormitory reserved specifically for students with allergies to dog dander. At a school, service animals can be restricted from areas where the animals on display are the natural prey or natural predators of dogs, where the presence of a dog would be disruptive, causing the displayed animals to behave aggressively or become agitated. They cannot be restricted from the other areas of the zoo. Maybe certain areas specifically, they can fundamentally alter those things. Question 27. What does under control mean? Do service animals have to be on a leash? Do they have to be quiet and not bark? The ADA requires that service animals be under the control of the handler at all times. In most instances, the handler will be the individual with a disability or a third party who accompanies the individual with a disability. In the school K-12 context and in similar settings, the school or similar entity may need to provide some assistance to enable a particular student to handle his or her service animal. The service animal must be harnessed, leashed, or tethered while in public places unless these devices interfere with the service animal's work or the person's disability prevents use of these devices. In that case, the person must use voice, signal, or other effective means to maintain control of the animal. For example, a person who uses a wheelchair may use a long retractable leash to allow her service animal to pick up or retrieve items. She may not allow the dog to wander away from her and must maintain control of the dog, even if it is retrieving an item at a distance from her. Or a returning veteran who has PTSD has a great difficulty entering unfamiliar spaces may have a dog that is trained to enter a space, check to see if there is no threats there, and come back and signal that it is safe to enter. The dog must be off-leash to do its job, but may be leashed at other times. Under control also means that a service animal should not be allowed to bark repeatedly in a lecture hall, theater, library, or other quiet place. However, if a dog barks just once or barks because someone has provoked it, this would not mean that the dog is out of control. So for example, someone comes up and you're walking with your service dog and someone comes up and goes boo right in your dog's face, that would be provoking. So your dog would have been provoked and is allowed to respond accordingly, like with a single bark or something like that. That would not be considered out of control. However, in a similar circumstance, you and your service dog are walking and there's just another person over there in the corner, just like standing there, not really doing anything, not bothering you or your dog, and your dog starts to randomly bark at them for no reason and continuously and repeatedly barks. That would not be provoking, and that would be considered out of control. Question 28. What can my staff do when a service animal is being disruptive? If a service animal is out of control and the handler does not take effective action to control it, staff may request that the animal be removed from the premises. So I'm going to define effective action to control the dog. If you are actively trying to get the dog to sit, trying to get the dog to focus on you, and it takes you like 2 seconds to get it to work, then that's fine. That is normally okay. However, if you're just standing there and letting your dog freak out, that is not okay. That's not effective action. Question 29. Are hotel guests allowed to leave their service animals in their hotel room when they leave the hotel? No, the dog must be under the handler's control at all times. So what that means is you can't just leave your dog in the hotel room if you're going to be gone for an extended period of time. So if you leave your room and you leave your dog out in the room, that's not okay. There are different laws in different states about this. I know in my state at least, it's allowed if you crate the dog, you are allowed to leave the hotel for a certain period of time. I'm not sure exactly how long it is, but I know you're allowed to leave the dog in the crate during that time, just not for an extended period. Question 30. What happens if a person thinks a covered entity's staff has discriminated against him or her? Individuals who believe they have been illegally denied access or service because they use service animals may file a complaint with the U.S. Department of Justice. Individuals who also have the right to file a private lawsuit in federal court charging the entity with discrimination under the ADA. So if a covered entity breaks one of these laws, if McDonald's tells you you can't come in with your service dog because they need an ID from you, you can sue them. And that's something you can do. I would check with your state's laws to see how that process happens. Question 31. Are stores required to allow service animals to be placed in a shopping cart? Generally, the dog must stay on the floor or the person must carry the dog. For example, if a person with diabetes has a glucose alert dog, he may carry the dog in a chest pack so it can be close to his face to allow the dog to smell his breath to alert him of a change in glucose levels. Your dog is not allowed in your shopping cart. Period. Not allowed. Your dog is not allowed in a shopping basket. Unless you are in a place where it literally says somewhere on there, on like where you pick up the carts, unless you're in a place where it says that you're allowed to do that because they clean them between every use, then that's not allowed. One example that I can think of is at PetSmart. They clean the carts between most uses. So if your dog is in a cart, when you're at PetSmart, they sometimes even have like spots in the cart that you're supposed to put your dog. That is okay because there's a sign that says so. In a food location, that would never be allowed because you're putting things in there that could be, someone could have an allergic reaction. Places like Home Depot, I believe that that's allowed. Places like, places that are pet friendly, they have different rules, but for places that the public is not allowed, or that the public is allowed and that pets are not allowed, you cannot put your service dog in a cart. Question 32. Are bars, restaurants, and other places that serve food or drink required to allow service animals to be seated on chairs or allow the animal to be fed at the table? No. Seating, food, and drink are provided for customer use only. The ADA gives a person with disability the right to be accompanied by his or her service animal, but covered entities are not required to allow an animal to sit or be fed at the table. So again, this question, like this, what they're saying right here, they don't have to give you water for your dog. You technically, I don't even know if you're allowed to order food for your dog. I think most places obviously would want to make that money and they're like, okay, fine. Like, if you go to McDonald's and you're sitting at McDonald's and you order a hamburger for your dog, I'm pretty sure that they would serve you. But if you're at a restaurant, I don't think they have to serve your dog. And that's just kind of stated in this rule here, is that seating, so they can't sit there, food, so they can't eat the food there, and drink are provided for customer use only, so not for the dog. So technically, I'm pretty sure you don't have legal right to order food or drink for your dog at a restaurant. Question 33. Are gyms, fitness centers, hotels, or other municipalities that have swimming pools required to allow a service animal in the pool with its handler? No. The ADA does not override public health rules that prohibit dogs in swimming pools. However, service animals must be allowed on the pool deck and in other areas where the public is allowed to go. So your dog can sit right at the edge of the pool and watch you swim. But they're not allowed to go in the pool. Question 34. Are churches, temples, synagogues, mosques, and other places of worship required to allow individuals to bring their service animals into the facility? No. Religious institutions and organizations are specifically exempt from the ADA. However, there may be state laws that apply to religious organizations. There might be state laws that apply to different religious locations in your state. However, by this federal law, they do not have to be ADA compliant in any way, shape, or form. So churches aren't required to have elevators. Churches aren't required to have space for wheelchairs. They aren't required to make things a certain space amount. And they aren't required to allow your service animal in the building. Question 35. Do apartments, mobile home parks, and other residential properties have to comply with the ADA? The ADA applies to housing programs administered by state and local governments, such as public housing authorities, and by places of public accommodation, such as public and private universities. In addition, the Fair Housing Act applies to virtually all types of housing, both public and privately owned, including housing covered by the ADA. Under the Fair Housing Act, housing providers are obligated to permit as reasonable accommodation the use of animals that work, provide assistance, or perform tasks that benefit persons with disabilities, or provide emotional support to alleviate a symptom or effect of a disability. For information on the Fair Housing Act requirements, see HUD's notice on service animals and assistance animals for people with disabilities in housing and HUD funded programs. So, specifically, this rule is talking about any place you want to live. So if you want to go live at a dorm in a private or public university, if you want to go live in an apartment, if you want to go live in a house, or you want to live, wherever you want to live, if that place is publicly owned by the state, or if it's privately owned by a landlord, they legally have to allow you to have your service animal or emotional support animal with you. They can't charge you any extra fees. They can't require certain things from you. They just have to allow you to be there. There are a lot of places that will say, can I at least just have like a doctor's note saying that you need a service dog? That kind of stuff. And in that situation, I usually just give them that because it's just easier rather than arguing with them. But I don't know if they're legally allowed to ask for that information or not. Question 36. Do federal agencies such as the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs have to comply with the ADA? No. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is the federal law that protects the right of people with disabilities to participate in federal programs and services. For information or to file a complaint, contact the agency's Equal Opportunity Office. Federal agencies technically don't have to comply with the ADA. Usually they will, but they don't have to. Question 37. Do commercial airlines have to comply with the ADA? No. The Air Carrier Access Act is the federal law that protects the rights of people with disabilities in air travel. For information or to file a complaint, contact the U.S. Department of Transportation Aviation Consumer Protection Division at 202-366-2220. So basically what that means is they have completely different rules on service animals. If you guys want me to do that video, please let me know, but they have completely different rules about service animals and emotional support animals and bringing them with you on planes and into airports. That is to just bring different public places. So I would definitely check on that act prior to going on a plane with your service animal. So they do have an information line. It is 800-514-0301. That is the ADA information line. You can talk to them during their business hours, and you can talk to an ADA specialist about any questions you might have. And their website is www.ada.gov, and you can check out the FAQ there or any other documents you're curious about with service dogs. Otherwise, you can watch my other video about the main rules and regulations of service animals via the ADA. So yeah, that's kind of all I had for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope it was helpful, and I will see you guys in whatever we make next. Bye.